Hello everyone, welcome to Devlog 0 of Plagueborne, the Fell Covenant, which is a retro real-time tactics game inspired by the Myth series. If you ever played the Myth series, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but these kinds of games just aren't being made anymore, especially from a single-player perspective. The genre itself, real-time tactics, more or less died in the early 2000s. So I want to build this game inspired by Myth, with a few new elements and a few twists to the gameplay. And I want to release it for PC, including Linux and Windows, as well as Steam Deck. So just a quick summary of the game. You command a small squad of units, think in the dozens, in a mission-based, grimdark narrative. There is no base building. You get straight into the tactical combat with unique objectives in each mission. There's simple unit progression across missions. In Myth, there was the concept of veterancy. I want to expand on that and introduce a level-based progression system with both active and passive abilities. And just like in Myth, positioning is critical and friendly fire is possible. Here's the core gameplay loop. Straight out of Myth, I really like it. It's simple. I think it gives a lot of opportunity for immersion and delivering a good narrative, kind of intermixed with the real-time tactics gameplay. So you have the mission briefing in the form of a journal entry that lays the groundwork. There's some images. It's professionally narrated, well written. We might have a map kind of showing the context of the area and orienting the player to what they need to do. Then we have the meat, which is the real-time tactics gameplay. And then we have the mission wrap up with our narrative hook to kind of propel the player forward. Okay, so the systems we'll need for this game, I've already started on many of them. I've finished some, still polishing them, very early in development at this point. But we have classic real-time strategy control. I left click to select. I can click on individual units, double click on a unit to select all of that type. Can select with a box. I can assign control groups. All of this will be done via mouse and keyboard, but touchscreen commands will be available on Steam Deck. Combat is in real time. Unit stances can be assigned, including aggressive, passive, and defensive. This allows you to choose how your units interact with the enemy, so that you don't have to do too much micromanagement. I also want to introduce the concept of threat, which expands on the original Myth series. Enemy units will manage threat, similar to how this works in World of Warcraft and other MMOs, right? You have the concept of a tank, so certain units will be able to taunt, so you can keep the enemy off your more vulnerable units, such as archers. Units will also have abilities. This is kind of taking that Myth formula and adding a twist. There will be both passive and active abilities that are chosen on level up, which allows you to kind of have a sort of build at the unit level, and then combining a bunch of different units built different ways, you have a build at the army level. There'll be a maximum of 2 active abilities at any one time. These can be anything from attacks to heals to defensive abilities and taunts, things like that. They're triggered via UI or hotkeys, and then you have your passive abilities, which augment stats and kind of work in conjunction with the active abilities to define a build. Enemies will also use abilities such as a net attack. You know, an enemy melee might throw a net at your archer, which snares them and allows them to get essentially swarmed and overwhelmed. All right, so environment interaction is a very key element of the gameplay, just like in Myth. Range attacks are actual projectiles. They fly through the air. They can hit obstacles like trees or buildings. Explosive rounds and grenades and things like that will roll downhill. So positioning is incredibly important. Elevation actually does change the gameplay, right? Units can fire further as well as do more damage from an elevated height. And as I mentioned, you know, things roll, so be careful with your explosive units. For the setting in the game world, I want to take a bit of a different tack here. Instead of fantasy, I want to go for historical fiction. So I'll be setting the game in the Black Death, so mid-14th century, high Middle Ages. We will be based heavily in medieval history with a strong bent towards mysticism, and you know, obviously it's fiction, so there will be quite a bit of fantasy mixed in there. It'll start in England, but will lead the player to various places in Europe and the Mediterranean. The story follows Brother Edric, who was once a knight in the service of Lord Blackwood. He's now a monk in the Order of St. Severus, a group of monks dedicated to eliminating plague and healing their parish. He's been charged by Bishop Aldith to investigate strange occurrences in a nearby town of Dunham, and that includes rumors of a new pestilence and rumors of the dead rising from their graves. So as Edric begins this investigation in the first mission, he starts to kind of unravel and untangle a plot. It's a grand misanthropic conspiracy of dark forces attempting to snuff out humanity's free will. Here's some concept art of Edric. Here's an example of what those mission briefings will look like. You know, I want the writing to really pop, to make the player want to investigate and actually complete the mission. I'm also going to be throwing in some Bible verses because it is, you know, set in the Middle Ages. I really want to kind of add a lot of flavor from real world lore if I can. Some themes here. I actually want to feature religious characters and religious institutions as kind of the good guys, so to speak. In modern media, it's become very, very common to kind of portray religious characters in a negative light or as simpletons. I want to turn that on its head. I want them to be the stars of the show. I want them to be the protagonists. And then here's a few of the themes I'll be covering in the game. But again, it's just a game. No political viewpoints here. It's all just to add immersion and flavor. Visual style. It's going to be a mashup of PSX era graphics as well as early 2000s PC 3D. So very low poly. Units will be like 500 to 600 polys. Maybe some will be more detailed as needed. Texture size max of 128. Likely we'll use mostly realistic photo-based texturing with quite a few hand-drawn details. It'll be a very grim, dark aesthetic, and it should run on a potato. I want pretty much anyone to be able to play it. I'm building this game with entirely free and open source software. So Godot as my game engine, Blender, GIMP, other tools for all the art. And then I'm working with artists for things like character art because I'm not an artist by trade, even though I'm learning. I'm making most of the environment art. This way I can leverage my skills as a software developer and an architect. Once I am ready to release the game, I'll release it on Steam as well as a physical media release. I'll also release the source code under an open source license like GPL. So if you're a fan of the game, you'll be able to download it, build it, mod it, as long as you redistribute it under an appropriate open source license. Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, definitely give me a sub, give me a follow, and keep tabs on the game. We've got a lot of interesting stuff to come. Thank you.